life really is fascinating. I've noticed lately, well, I've noticed especially just now that I've really been integrating more feminine energy into my masculine energy. Because it's really interesting to observe the pendulum swings within my own state of being. Where at different times I'm in different cycles and different spirals that I guess one of the many lessons that I'm experiencing through my current experiences is something that I'm noticing within my awareness. Because, I mean, it's really quite fun to get immersed in the density of the human experience and then get consumed by it and then simply pause and rest in awareness and then even surrender beyond resting in awareness. And then as the energy shifts, so much clarity comes as to what experiences have been manifested for, whatever we can currently perceive in any current perception. Because, there's always filters and lenses and distortions or duality or non-duality, because there's always the Holy Trinity. There's always at least three. It's like positive, negative, and neutral. It's sometimes the pendulum isn't a pendulum. Sometimes it's just a point. But all three exist simultaneously, which is, yeah. It's also interesting to observe different states of consciousness within, different experiences, where I can sit in front of the fire and have such deep awareness of my state of being. But then other times completely being consumed in other experiences where there's such a small amount of awareness on the state of being. Life certainly is an incredible ride with an infinite amount to explore. That, that's why I pay so much attention to my state of being now, because for a good portion of my life I was seemingly unconscious about consciousness in many ways, and wasn't actively working with my prana and my consciousness and my state of being and the physical body in the way that I do now. And previously experiencing so much disharmony and dis-ease and lack of peace and all of the things that now come relatively easily due to the amount I've practiced the different practices that led me to shift my state of consciousness and shift my energy. And it's like all of the experiences that I experienced, that I once perceived as horrific, or when you're in victim consciousness and deeply miserable, the things that come up then, which the further away you get are harder to remember. It's in all of the woe is me stuff. Is about as much as I can currently remember about that stuff. But then occasionally I'll go for a trip down memory lane and get closer to that, and it's like it builds a greater capacity for gratitude. Because that's something I've always craved is my whole life, is depth. Like tonight, Niana showed me a private message that someone had sent her, and a seemingly complete stranger, the depth of vulnerability in what they shared and why they shared it, and all of that stuff. It was really incredible to read someone taking the time to just pause and follow that hunch, because that there's those things, it's so easy at times to just be like, no, I'm just not going to do that, I'm not going to send that message or say that thing. There's something that I am actively practicing these days, is saying things more often also. Just purely for the expression, to play with different expression. Like, say for example, like if someone listening was looking for a specific example for what I'm trying to talk about, like if you imagine, say, a mantra, so many different ways, different emotional expressions, whether you're thinking at the time of chanting or not, or doing something creative, like, visual arts, like, painting and things like that. It's like when I was painting a lot of mandalas, I didn't necessarily realize that at some point I would integrate what I was working on. Like I was actively integrating things as I was dot painting, but I didn't realize that part of the integration was getting to the point where I was then doing what I was doing with the dot art with reality, so much so that there's so much else that I'm now playing with that I haven't chosen to allocate the time to dot paint for quite some time now. Like, it's been months. And I've got multiple pieces on the painting table, and heaps of other partly prepared and fully prepared canvases, like wooden rounds and stones and things that I've cast. But yeah, it's interesting where different choices lead to many different destinations. and how you can be experiencing the experience you experience in one thing in many different other ways. Like in some ways, me recording this video, I'm in a very similar state of being recording this video as when I'm dot painting or doing many different things now that I can simply be in this state of being. And it's, it was funny because years ago at some point I'd tasted, what some would probably refer to as like a samadhi state of being or things like that, at points, where I first tasted those moments, just such a brief fleeting moment. There were times where I perceived that I wished that I wanted to experience that all the time. But then I did experience that for quite a while. And then I chose variety, that I wanted more contrast. And I mean, the timing is impeccable. It's, yeah. But then in some ways you kind of have to put yourself in different experiences for different contrast and realize that the external manifestation is just it's like a constantly changing mirror. And it's always interesting whenever you notice the rendering. But anytime I have noticed the rendering, then it's usually in the midst of a big shift, and then everything is suddenly a lot different. And then your filters and lenses change, and then at some point, like I was explaining before, you can go through seeing through the filters and lenses of dis-ease and disharmony and all of the lack words, and then flip into the opposite and also the middle, where there's complete abundance. There always was. It was just a shift in awareness, shift in focus, but then simultaneously just nothingness, just the vastness of the cosmos, and the bits in which we perceive as the human experience. Yeah, it's life sure is an interesting experience. Isn't even the right word. Like, there are so many words that I don't have words for, and it's really interesting because I do find that there's often Hindi words like Hindi or Sanskrit. It's other languages that even the language in which the definition of the way in which English is based on separation, like it's a very separate language. It's always about, like, it's in all of the descriptive words. It's in the architecture of the English language, whereas the contrast between the unity within other Eastern languages is refreshing feels like the closest English word. But it's, and also more pure in ways where it's, yeah. And there's also more depth and contrast and meaning and capacity in the other languages. And it's interesting because even in the communication of this, there is so much separation between the different languages when language is simply an expression of vocal vibration. So it's also a distortion within a perception. But it's, I mean, there's some things that are kind of hardwired like that, which can also be rewritten. But yeah, sometimes it's nice to simply rest in awareness and let some distortions simply be, because they serve many purposes also. I hope you also remember to take time to simply be. And just let your entire being relax and soften. Until next time.